Hey everyone, quick video just talking about 10 side deck cards I think are a little bit underrated at the moment. This means I'm not going to be talking about cards such as Dyna or Compulse or Breaker because everyone rates those cards. So to try and be as objective as possible, I'm going to be assuming that the meta is the competitive deck section of the Edison format Discord server. And lastly, not all of these cards will be sideable in every single deck. Some of these are narrow and it's up to you to determine if your deck can side any of these. These are also in no particular order, by the way, so it's not like any of these are necessarily better than the others. They all have their own utility. So the first one is Banisher of the Radiance. I originally started siding Banisher in Hero Beat as an answer to recruiter decks such as zombies and fairies, but something else it also hilariously does is destroy Dragon Turbo. When you summon Banisher against Turbo, they can still activate their cards, but they lose resources. For example, the spells they activate get banished, which means they can't recur them with Magical Stone. They also can't activate Avarice because obviously everything is banished, and Whitestone won't add Blue Eyes, so they lose a large portion of their card advantage. They also can't use Debris to get a second dragon, which matters a lot for outputting the right amount of damage. And this also means they need to be very careful with their utility dragons like Drago and Prime Material, because if something happens to them, then they would lose them forever. And since it's a monster and not a spell like Defissure, they don't have very efficient ways to answer it. They can't just heavy or MST or start playing right after they use those cards, so the outs are very inefficient. They can Vortex, but in that case, they already spent their Vortex plus one other card just for one monster, and then their discard also got banished, which makes it a lot less likely for them to be able to turbo out their entire deck. Drago can attack over it, but Trooper cannot because it needs to send to graveyard as cost, which means that they have very, very few efficient outs in their deck, and trying to draw into them is really bad for Dragon Turbo. They can try walling for a bit with Debris or Flamvol Guard, but you can presumably play under your Banisher a lot better than them if you're siding it, and that means that you can probably make something that beats over a 2k Defender. However, Banisher is actually a narrow card. There are many matchups where Banisher seems good, but actually isn't. For example, siding Banisher against Frogs seems good because you just banish their Frogs and then they can't play, but the reality is that it's a 1600 normal summon that won't actually banish their Frogs, because if you have a proactive Floodgate like Banisher, then the Frog player will just not summon their Frogs to get banished before using their infinite spot removal such as Soul Exchange on your Banisher if it actually hurts them. Some other matchups include Lightshorn and Vayu. It seems like it would be good to banish the Vayus that they set, but realistically what actually happens is that they just set a Raikou or a Hamster and then you spend your turn basically doing nothing. It's still very good against recruiter decks like Fairy and Zombies, specifically Dragon Turbo though, so if you need something for those matchups, then Banisher is quite good. Next is Imperial Iron Wall. This card is notoriously nasty. Every single deck has some way to banish cards, especially since D-Prison and Bottomless are the most played trap cards right now, and Kais is among the most played monsters. Miracle Fusion, Vayu, Red Eyes Wyvern, Malicious, DD Warrior Lady, Caius, Book of Life, Dad, etc. A lot of decks either completely lose their win condition or at least a very strong part of their engine under Imperial Iron Wall, and it hits good generic staples. So why isn't it played? Kind of for that reason. There's not a lot of decks that can play super well under their own Iron Wall. GBs can do it, Blackwings can do it, Machina can also do it, and maybe a Hero Beat list or Dragon Turbo also can, but those are more questionable. I mostly think Imperial Iron Wall is undersided at the moment because I rarely see Blackwing side it, and I also rarely see Machina side it, even though I think it would be pretty great in both of those decks. The third card is Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell. Now, this one might be potentially cope for me, but I do think that this card has a lot of potential. If you think about one of the best cards in the format, Miracle Fusion, then stopping that with a counter trap and all other copies in the deck completely obliterates the ceiling of hero decks, and it gets even better because hero decks also have other high power spell cards that they play at multiple copies such as Gemini Spark in Hero Beat, or even Enemy Controller in Hero Frog. These cards are all going to be +1 at best anyways, so choosing your neg and eliminating all the threats in the deck seems very worth it to me. It's also canonically the hero counter, as Daichi used it to stop Poly in the anime. People who know me know I hate -1s, but if you hit a card like Miracle with it, it's like the best -1 in the format. But as with any card, there's flaws. If this card said discard any card, it would be insane good, but it specifically says you have to discard a spell card. And not many decks in Edison play a lot of spells, especially not discardable spells. It might be the least played card type in Edison between monster spells and traps, so it would probably have to be a deck that plays upstarts or books like Diva Hero. Personally, I think that the Instant Fusion zombie deck that people are playing right now would benefit a lot from this card, even though I do not think that deck is personally very good. I do think that Cursed Seal, the Forbidden Spell, also kind of circumvents some of its generic weaknesses due to the way that hero decks are typically built. The weakness of these counter traps tends to be that you have to set them preemptively because there are direct timing cards, which means that if you don't set them before they activate the Miracle Fusion, then it loses a lot of value, which means that you have to play into a card such as Raikou, which will remove your back row before you can even encounter the high value cards. But the hero decks pretty much never play Raikou. It's very rare for hero decks to ever play Raikou. Number 4 is Soul Release. I love Soul Release, and I have it in every single one of my side decks at one copy. The reason is two matchups, Frogs and LS decks. A couple things to establish about Soul Release are that one, it's a normal spell, which means that it's a preemptive spot and not a reactive stop. And reactive stops are typically better because they actually kill the resource. Number two is that it's a -1, and you really do not want inactive cards against the meta decks because they will just kill you while you don't have enough cards that you can play. That's why I always advise only playing one copy, because if you play two, then you could draw two and have dead cards and lose the game because you oversighted into your Soul Releases. Especially because Soul Release is a card that you only need to resolve one time anyways. But despite these flaws, it's just so highly impactful against these two decks if you can resolve the one copy. Against Frogs, obviously you banish the Treeborns, but if they went through the sub combo, you also rip their swaps, and that means that the dupes don't float into anything meaningful anymore. At most, they can maybe grab a Unifrog. Or if you're playing against Hero Frog, you can also rip their heroes, and it suddenly becomes very scary because the deck typically only has around 5 main deck heroes. So if you rip two suddenly, they have to be extremely careful sending into Deep Prison or Bottomless. And those are just the extra benefits, not including the main part where you kill all their Treeborns. For Lightsworn, it just streamlines your defense. Take away the Lumina targets or Beckoning and Reincarnation targets, but the real issue is that it becomes kind of hard to JD if they resolve one Soul Release. Pure Lightsworn typically only plays between 8 and 9 names, and 4 of them at one copy, so if you Soul Release the names at one copy, then it suddenly becomes very difficult to JD. Even just hitting Plague is very good, or if they milled their JDs, then hitting JD is very good for you also. And against Christiasworn, it's similarly strong. You can choose to banish utility monsters for their Beckoning or Lightsworns for their JD, and then you only have to focus on the fairy aspect of the deck, or you can even use Soul Release to control the fairies if you're really afraid of Christia. I think the reason other people don't love Soul Release as much as I do is either because they side it at multiple copies so it bricks, or they side it in matchups where it's not good. For example, I think if you side Soul Release against a deck like Zombies, it's bad. Zombies will not put anything useful in their graveyard that you want to banish until they need to, so you end up with a dead card that just fuels their return. If they have a turtle in the graveyard, do you really want to Soul Release the turtle just to preemptively stop Book of Life? Not really. They still keep their Book of Life and they can send another zombie to graveyard easily. Value's another matchup where it seems good but probably isn't. A lot of Vayu players do hold their materials in graveyard for pressure, and in this situation, it's really good, but it's also high variance. Because they could just summon on the turn they dump, and they do it a lot, so I wouldn't recommend it. Aside from Frogs and LS decks, you could side it against Machina. Banishing Fortress is pretty good, and banishing 5 makes it hard to Avarice, but it doesn't really help if you don't have an out for the Fortress. Dragon Turbo is another one. You could easily just banish the debris targets, although probably not anymore with Vortex Trooper being played, but it also hits the utility dragons or red MDs if they haven't Avarice yet. And most importantly, it's almost definitely better than some of the trash you have in your main deck that just doesn't interact with Turbo at all. At number 5, I have Trapstun. Aggro decks are some of the best decks of Edison format right now, like Blackwing and Hero Beat, and they play a lot of traps. Pretty much every deck plays a lot of traps because Blackwing is one of the strongest decks, and you need traps not to lose to Blackwing, so as a result, most decks end up playing like 10 traps, which makes sense because there's a lot of good traps in Edison. Vayu lists often have more, and those are all the most popular decks of the format that aren't Frogs. Trapstun trades 1 for 1 with any trap that has no cost and makes sure the rest of your plays go through unless they have Book, which is becoming a lot less popular. If you actually look at the representation of Book, it's been going down a lot. Unlike 7 tools, there's also no cost, and unlike Dust, you don't need to preemptively do it on end phase to hopefully snipe the meaningful back row. It's reactive, which I value a lot. It gets even better if you consider that there's also the traps with costs. Icarus Attack, Deck Devastation Virus, Discard Traps. If you Trapstun these, then you are in a very good spot, and they often just lose to the Trapstun if it was on DDV because they had to sacrifice a very good monster to even activate it in the first place. At number 6, I have My Body's a Shield. Similarly to number 5, My Body is just very strong in the format right now. Aggro decks are strong and they have a lot of monster destruction. Gemini Spark, Icarus Attack, generic traps like Torrential and Mirror Force. There's a lot of monster destruction in the format that also has a cost, which means that it actually goes plus against some of the best decks in the format. More importantly, it's also good on a meta gameplay basis because people will be using their spot removal, such as Dad, on monsters. Targeting the monster is almost always a play because they don't want to get bottomless and also get no value, which is why My Body eats them alive when they do this play. It's also just a generically good card to keep tempo. It's a quick play spell, so you can even activate it from hand. It lets you play aggro into Mirror Force and Torrential, and it's just a strong card. It doesn't even need to be a sided card, but it's definitely strong against aggro in particular. Aggro decks typically play a lot of monster removal because they're fine with trading card advantage for damage, which means that if you don't have field presence, then you take a lot of damage and they eventually just kill you or put you in positions where you can't really win. At number 7, I have Needle Sealing. This one is probably a bit weird, but Needle Sealing is like your second Torrential that also doesn't affect set monsters. Yes, 4 monsters is kind of an overcommit, but it's not actually dead as much as you think because it counts your monsters. So if you play a flip deck, it's pretty easy for you to trigger it yourself without costs, but the real value in this card, in my opinion, is against Frogs. Frogs already fear Torrential more than any card in the format because there isn't really a way that they can play around Torrential. They can maybe force it with Unifrog if they play it, but it's pretty hard. It also trades favorably against Absolute Zero board, so that's another pretty great thing going for it. There's a lot of decks that struggle to play around Needle Sealing, not just Frogs though, and if Diva Hero is going for any Synchro line, it's pretty likely that there's going to be 3 monsters on the field at any time. The non-tuners such as Malicious, the Diva, and the Diva Summon, it happens quite a lot that you can have live Needle Sealing. Obviously, this is a card that needs a lot of testing, but for sure it's good against Frogs. I just haven't really identified other matchups besides Frogs and Diva Hero where I think I would probably bring it in. At number 8, I have Skill Drain. I love Skill Drain as a side card to win. I hate Floodgates in design in general. Whenever I have a deck that can play Skill Drain, I play Skill Drain. The thing about Edison is that, unlike GOAT, Edison is a power monster-based format, which means all the best cards in the deck are monsters, which means you need monster effects. And Skill Drain stops every single one of them. Hamster, Raikou, Caius. I'm working on a video right now to explain what makes a deck good, and part of it is having good generic spot removal. That's a big issue because a lot of decks rely on Raikou or Caius as their good generic spot removal, which Skill Drain negates. Which means that Skill Drain is an extra powerful floodgate because it actually floodgates the floodgate outs. People often ask what to side against Vayu because it seems like it has no clear counters, but if you can, I think Skill Drain is huge. Their deck is extremely weak under Skill Drain. Hamster, Raikou, Caius, Armageddon Knight, they all do nothing, and Grepher just becomes neg. And their Skill Drain outs are floodgated too, so it's really hard for them to play under Skill Drain. The truly savant Vayu players will tell you that they just summon Armageddon Knight and flip Torrential, but unless they draw their drain out, then there's not that much they can do, and even if they find their out, you can presumably get value from it. It's one of the best cards against Frogs, so I think if you can side Skill Drain in your deck, I definitely would, although not that many decks can play Skill Drain similarly to Iron Wall because it is so powerful. I think Pure Blackwing can side it, I think that Zombies can side it, Hero Beat obviously can side it, but aside from that, there's not many decks that can actually abuse Skill Drain in the format. At number 9, I have Dark Illusion. This one is very specific, but ever since Dimitri topped with Dark Illusion in his hybrid deck, this card has been nowhere to be seen, and I have absolutely no clue why. Dark Illusion is nasty. So many cards in the format target, and more importantly, it's a borderline guarantee that they will be targeting a monster eventually. Icarus Attack, Sirocco, Gemini Spark, Dad, Caius. It's strong against so many decks. Frogs is an obvious one, but also how many decks in the format don't play Caius? It's also just strong against generic cards like Brain or Deep Prison, which come up all the time. I honestly think it's very mainable in dark decks, and I can't explain why this card never became popular outside of that one top. At number 10, I have Deck Devastation Virus, and I know what you're thinking. How can Deck Dev possibly be underrated? Everyone knows that Deck Dev is one of the best cards in the format, and to that I say it's somehow still underrated because there are many Blackwing and Vayu decks that only side one copy. Deck Dev is a card that is even more disgusting when you think about it, because the first time I realized this was when James made it in War League, and Deck Dev Sultai when he was playing Blackwing, and it obliterated his hand. Then I played a Vayu player, and he Deck Dev'd me for 4 cards when I was on Blackwing. I thought it was variance, but Blackwing typically has at least 8 targets for the Deck Dev. In my opinion, the only decks you shouldn't side Deck Dev against are Blackwing and Hero Beat. So if people are even bringing it against Blackwing, then I don't know why you shouldn't even be maxing it or even maining it. Killing all the small monsters and invalidating a lot of the deck is bad enough, but it is difficult to quantify how important full knowledge of 3 turns is. After RBET 4, back in 2022, I had stopped playing Dust Shoot. So that is kind of a me problem. Like, obviously, you don't want to stop playing Dust Shoot because Dust Shoot is broken, but I was playing Edison on hard mode because after recently playing with Dust Shoot again, I didn't understand how important full knowledge is. Full knowledge off Dust Shoot is already enough to win for most decks, but full knowledge for 3 turns is unspeakably powerful. You essentially make the best play at all times without risk. Now, let's talk about how many monsters it hits. Obviously, full knowledge for 3 turns, as long as you don't go neg, is incredibly worth it. So let's say Deck Dev hitting 2 monsters is a good baseline for a Deck Dev floor that you want. I'll be using examples of topping deck lists. There's a bit of variance depending on build. But Disaster Dragon, 12 of their 20 monsters, dead. Diva Hero, 11 of 18 of their monsters, dead. Dragon Turbo, they get FTK'd, and they can't draw on their Deck Dev or it kills all their starters except for Instant Fusion. Fairy, it's an FTK unless you somehow drop them to 4 fairies and they have Christia. Frog, 15 of 23 monsters. Christia Sworn, 16 of 31 monsters. Vayu, 13 of their 21 monsters. Zombies, 13 of 20 monsters. There's things to consider, like if you have graveyard access or what plays they can make under Deck Dev, or if they side down on targets. But these are very, very scary numbers. It's pretty likely that Deck Dev hits at least 2 cards, and in my experience, it often hits a lot more. To prove this point, I actually made a DB account and played this list. This is just a Deck Dev Turbo list, and obviously it's also a hybrid Blackwing list, so it can win a lot without Deck Dev because it's just a strong deck. But I made 3 Deck Devs that I basically never sided out except against this Dreamwork Werewolf Sun player who I just lost to, just to see how powerful is Deck Devastation Virus really? How hard can I get carried by only 1 Deck Dev? And it was sadly successful. Ladder is not representative of tournaments, and tournaments have more Blackwing and Hero Beat players, which is why Deck Dev is probably better sided than mained in a tournament. But there are decks like Vayu where they should absolutely be deck devved, and they're not getting deck devved enough. It's hard for me to describe in words how broken full knowledge is. It's just so hard to lose when you know every single one of your opponent's plays, unless your hand is really that bad. My last disclaimer is that these results shouldn't be taken too seriously because they are ladder, and ladder is not representative of tournaments. There's not enough people on at all times in order to get power paired matches. And deck dev is also a high variance card, so the sample size might also be a little bit low. I only have about 60 matches here. But it's just to show that deck dev mained at 3 copies should not be successful, just logically, but it ended up overperforming by a substantial amount to the point where I think it's at least something to think about if you should be siding more copies of it. But yeah, that's about it. These are 10 side deck cards that I think are underrated or underplayed right now. If you disagree or know anything that I left out, let me know in the comments, and that's about it. See ya.